Hello and welcome to a new episode of The Other Side of Sales. This is Ashley Early. I'm here with Casey Jones and Tim Clarke, who is going to be having a conversation with us today about a bunch of interesting things. Casey, tell us more about Tim.
So Tim is founder and CEO of UNCrushed, which is an amazing new organization that is really bringing to light the health issues and mental health issues in our industry. And Tim, I'd love if you could kind of kick us off with a little bit of an explanation of UNCrushed, kind of in your words, and what prompted you to create this organization and this movement? What was that kind of aha moment for you?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm really grateful to be on this podcast with you today. We have a massive challenge right now, both here in the US and internationally. From some of the latest research, a staggering 1 in 5 people in America are experiencing a mental illness. And of that number, 60% of them aren't seeking treatment. And I know from my own personal experience, there are so many stigmas associated, even just saying that term mental illness, like I have a mental illness or a challenge. And really that could be so diverse. It could be related to alcoholism, substance abuse. It could also be trauma related, which then goes into things like PTS, anxiety, stress, burnout. The spectrum's really wide. And, I think this is a really important conversation to have, particularly in the workplace. There's so many conversations around work-life balance, and really a lot of these conversations are really on the life side of things. Like, we don't talk about them at work. And if we really think about it, that's a massive issue, particularly in sales. How are you going to be able to turn up and show up and be the best version of yourself if you have these challenges going on? So I'm happy to dive into my own story today. The great news is that with the nonprofit that we've created, which is uncrushed.org, it's a platform and community for people to come forward and to share their own personal experiences of mental health. And the goal there really is for people to be able to see these stories, read them, and relate, and then hopefully be able to reach out for support. Many organizations have employee assistance programs and some great services and support available, but really we're focused on that first bit, like how do we help people to pick up the phone or to email and reach out for support. And I certainly found that when I knew that I wasn't alone and that there were other people that are going through similar things, that's when I felt a lot more confident in reaching out for support.
Why do you think it is that first step is so important and people have so much trouble, especially in the sales and the business world, taking it?
Yeah, I mean, if I look at my own career, so when I graduated from university, I've worked for three, in terms of, I guess, proper jobs, 3 large global organizations in sales. And then my career has always really been going up and up, and about 10 years of those were in sales. And then in 2013, out of nowhere, my dad, at the age of 60, I was 26, had a stroke and passed away very suddenly. I grew up in a single parent family, so he was the closest person ever to me. And I was then faced with, what do I do? And the reality was that the only thing that I knew really well was academics and work. Ever since being bullied at school at the age of 11, all the way through university into work, when I hit this experience, this traumatic event, I just immersed myself into work, and that worked for a period of time, and I thought I was holding it all together until I started to pick up some very unhealthy coping mechanisms, which then took me down to the place where I was suicidal, and I really had 2 options: either I die or I reach out for help. But I couldn't imagine having that conversation and saying, "Hey, I'm not doing the best that I can right now," or "I'm struggling." because particularly in sales, I think that's seen as a weakness. So much of success is measured purely by the quota attainment, whereas I just think it's really unrealistic. You know, everyone, the one thing that we're all going to share in life is death. And it's also the one thing that no one really talks about, you know, for people that are close to us. And so the reality is that we spend so much of our time at work, and we're all going to go through different things. But for me, I work with everything to me. And so the idea of me saying anything or reaching out for help that could then, I guess, damage people's perception of me, I was really worried about that.
Yeah, I can absolutely understand why. And like, I'm curious from your perspective, do you think that there's something about the sales role that either attracts people that feel this need to kind of suffer in silence, or do you think it's sort of the culture of the role that sends that message, or maybe it's a combination of both?
Yeah, nature or nurture.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely think it's a combination of different factors. I think, you know, first of all, just looking at the geography that you're brought up in, I think internationally, everywhere in the world, we have a culture of not speaking about this stuff. I know certainly from England, I think it's even more so. Then when we start to look at different communities, people of color, there's even more of a stigma associated with that. When you go over to Asia, it's even worse. So there's that geography element. The next element is what are the family values that you've been brought up with? So for me, I was brought up with, you know, very strict values. My dad was a minister. You know, we had to, as a family, have this perfect image of a family, and you just don't speak about these things. I then had my own perceptions of what's an alcoholic, what's a drug addict. And, you know, I had my idea of perhaps walking down Market Street in San Francisco and I see a homeless person shooting up. That was my idea of an addict. But in reality, if we look at both in the US and globally with the opiate pandemic that we have going on right now, I'm a firm believer, and evidence supports this, that really this is everyone. It could be our best friend, it could be a family member. We're all struggling in one way or another. And then, yeah, when you start to then go into the work culture, what is the culture of the organization? What's the culture of that your manager is really running within that team? Is that manager creating a culture where you can come forward and feel that it's a safe place to talk about some of these things? So yeah, it's a whole variety of issues or challenges. And then the icing on the cake is that sales factor as well. As I said earlier, with so many salespeople purely being measured on their quota attainment, you know, that just adds into why people wouldn't want to come forward and talk about some of their issues.
So can you tell us a little bit more about what your journey was? You mentioned, you know, having this idea of coming forward and saying, I need help. I'm not what I should be right now. How did you get past that, or what? Can you tell us a little bit more about what that journey was like for you, or what got you past it?
Yeah, I mean, I got to the point in the middle of 2017. My role at the time at Salesforce, I was running a number of our different events, our thought leadership initiatives for sales professionals. So my online persona and event persona, it really looked put together. I'm interviewing people like Simon Sinek, Arianna Huffington, Gary Vaynerchuk, and so on the face of it, everything looked great. But the reality of it was that I was so out of touch with my emotions. Since losing my dad, without drugs and alcohol, I'd become very good at self-numbing. So I was just not in touch with anything. I started to drink more. I started to use different narcotics, which, you know, just added to that in terms of me being really disconnected. And because I was very good at my job, as I said, academic and and work has been such a good coping mechanism for me, I was able to be functional for a long period of time. And then the middle of 2017, something inside me just broke, and I had a breakdown. It was in front of all of my work colleagues, the people that reported into me, as well as people that I reported into, and had a number of suicidal ideations and threats. And that's really the point when a few days later on, when I realized that actually something needs to change, and stuff had just become too much. I'd had about several years of just not dealing with anything, just being completely out of touch, and so that's when over the last few years, I've really been working on myself, on my own journey, which really has been about getting in touch with myself, understanding what are my values, what are my true beliefs. And what I mean by that is I had these core false beliefs of I'm not good enough, I don't fit in, I'm not lovable, and ultimately they're false, but I still believe them, which is why they're called core false beliefs. And so trying to disrupt that thinking. And so a big element for me in my recovery was finding sobriety, both from narcotics and alcohol. But really, when I use the word recovery, it's so much more than just being sober. It's understanding myself, being in touch with myself, loving myself, being comfortable with myself. And then that enables me, particularly in the workplace, to be the most authentic version of myself. And so at the end of last year, when myself and a few other people came together, we'd all come out and told our stories online, which was a part of our recovery. And that's when we decided, hey, there's an opportunity here to help other people tell their story. And I'm, many people listening to this have probably seen some of the Brené Brown TED Talks. I think it's the third, the one on vulnerability, and another one on shame are in the top 10 TED Talks in terms of all-time views. And she talks about this quote from Theodore Roosevelt, where he talks about the man in the arena. And really the concept here is that there are so many people that are spectators, and they're happy to judge, and they're happy to cast their opinion. But really it's the person that's in the arena, the person that has the blood, the dust, the experiences, those people that learn from that and come through from that and are happy to be vulnerable, which is really, I believe, the most authentic way of building a connection with someone else. When I'm sharing my story with you here, I believe you're getting to know the true me. A lot of people, I think, like the hot-wired connection is when you bitch about someone else. That's a really easy way of forming a connection, but it's not authentic. It's not true. And so that's why I'm such a big advocate of sharing my story, and it helped me in my own recovery. And I also know that it's helped many other people. And that's why I believe, particularly for people that are listening to this in whatever workplace, but particularly in sales, I understand how daunting it can be to say, hey, I have an issue, or I had an issue, and now I'm on the other side of things. But in reality, I think it really comes down to what are your core values, and what's your role, and what's your purpose here in life. And for me, it's so much more than just a number. I mean, I understand I need an income, I need a salary, just like anyone, to pay the bills. But how do I want to be remembered? How do I want to show up each day in life? And for me, it's so much more than just hitting a number.
I really appreciate you sharing all of that. I think I've been super inspired and motivated by, Brené Brown's lessons, as well as I think a lot of us have. And I think I know for myself, there's been a big shift in my life as I've become a lot more honest about the hard stuff and the ugly stuff. My connections with other people have become much richer and much deeper, and it's become easier for me to be authentically me, no matter kind of the situation. And so I'm curious from your perspective, for the leaders out there, for the managers, the bosses who want to help cultivate this culture of authenticity and openness and connection in their organizations, do you have any advice of how kind of simple, actionable steps that they can take to create that kind of safe space and that safe environment within their own organizations?
Yeah, I think first of all, many organizations are really cautious in this area, particularly in the U.S. There's many compliance and regulation that ultimately protects the employee. There's something called HIPAA, and that means like when I reach out to whatever employee assistance program, EAP, all of this information is protected. And so ultimately, if I need to go on leave or disability, all my manager will know is that I am disabled and that I'm getting treatment. And so as a result of that, many times organizations don't want to know any of the details associated with a particular issue. So I just want to highlight that first of all, because there are some, A, there's some protections for the employee, but B, I can understand it for a manager, how it can be slightly, how you have to be cautious in terms of how you navigate this. Now, if let me talk about it from my own perspective of how we're running UNCrushed, and it's purely volunteer-based. What we emphasize, first of all, is the importance of prioritization. So we tell everyone that, or we recommend, number 1 is health, number 2 is family, number 3 is work, and then number 4 is the volunteering that they do with UNCrushed. We then really try and create this culture where people feel comfortable in coming forward, not necessarily to share the exact details of whatever issue or challenge they may be going through, but having the comfort to come forward and say, hey, I need some time. I need to take a few days or a week or a month to step back and deal with a particular challenge. And because as a leader of this organization, we've started out setting that expectation, there aren't repercussions, that we're supportive of this. That's then enabled people that need to take their time to have that comfort to come forward and to ask for help. So again, we haven't had any issues there in terms of diving into the specifics and stuff that's protected, but it's all about this environment that we've created. Some of the other aspects as well is I appreciate it's slightly different within UNCrushed, but we've got people to come forward and share their own stories, their own experiences, and it's a big step for anyone within a team. I know for me now, like one of my goals at Salesforce is to continue to tell my story, and hopefully that will enable others to come and speak to me if they feel they need help or may not have an issue. And so it's almost like having these internal advocates, people that are at a point in their recovery who are happy to come forward and speak about whatever challenge they've experienced. And again, being supportive of that, I think it's a massive strength rather than a weakness. So it's really all about the culture that you're creating. And just because there are certain compliance laws about stuff you can't know, it doesn't mean that you should avoid this whole situation whatsoever, because that then creates the mentality of someone just not asking for help or not saying anything. And that could be extremely dangerous, not only for the individual, but also for your organization as well. If we look at, the impact on the bottom line of an organization.
And I think something happened.
Do you guys still hear me?
There we go. You're back.
Yeah, you cut out for just a second.
Do you want me to do that one again?
We lost you right about when you were talking about, you had just wrapped up talking about kind of internal advocates and sharing their stories and building a culture where that's supported.
Okay, yeah. So I think because there is, some of these challenges around compliance and information that you should and shouldn't know, it's really important that you don't use that as an excuse to avoid this whole conversation. It's really important that you do understand what you can and can't discuss, but then still embrace it and still recognize that if you don't have this supportive environment and people just disappear, not only is it a risk to them as an individual, but it's also a risk to your organization. If we look at how much in terms of revenue that disability impacts to your organization, it's significant. And this is another reason why not only from a benefits point of view do you need to be supportive, but trying to be proactive. So perhaps just looking at what are you doing for some of your team building activities. Maybe you've got your quarterly business review. Are you doing happy hour afterwards? Or are you doing something that actually could be conducive to mental health? And I just think there are so many other team activities that you could do. Also looking at, as a manager, when are you emailing your employees? Are you emailing in the evenings, at the weekends? Because that creates the mentality and the pressure to respond straight away. And so again, it's about setting out some boundaries that will ultimately support your team as well.
I love that idea of bringing up boundaries and team building, because those are really small things that almost people take for granted. But you're right, it sets that expectation of, if the boss is doing this, I need to do it too. And I was in a situation years ago where I was working with a manager who was a dad, and who was a brilliant dad. And the way he worked was he would come into the office really early. He'd get in at like 6 a.m. He'd leave at 3. He'd go be a dad for 4 or 5 hours. Then he'd jump back online at 8, 9 o'clock at night and work for another 2-3 hours. The problem was this created a very long day for a lot of us. And because we were, at this point, a lot of the team was very early in our careers, we just all assumed that meant we had to be up really late. And those of us that, again, had to be in at 6 a.m., it took a couple months for him to realize the reason we were all so draggy in the morning was because we were making sure we were staying up to see his email so we could respond and not be the person who's lackadaisical. And it was interesting watching him go through that process of realizing, oh, I'm doing what I need to do to take care of my family and my process, but it's impacting the team. So him setting those boundaries of, I'm going to do this, you do not respond to me, saying it's okay, and doing that, it's incredibly important. And same thing with the team building events. I had someone literally email me today, actually, in response to a blog post that I wrote, asking about managing men and women. Said he came from a boiler room mentality, knew that was not healthy, wanted to be more supportive of the women on his team, and asked about spiffs that he could do for them. And he's like, yeah, I'm noticing $50 at the bar doesn't really go very far. And I had the exact same advice. It was, look for stuff that's experiential, that's either time-based or things like that. Not just for the women, but because not everyone cares about $50 at a bar. Yep. In fact, a lot of people especially if you can't assume that's, like you said, it's 1 in 5 people. Statistically, that means if you have a 15-person team, you have 2 to 3 people who probably have active struggles in their lives. And as a manager, the last thing you want to do is be enabling an illness. Yep. So
yeah, and if you look at like putting addiction to one side, like in general, the amount of happy hours that I've been to where the following morning people are asking, oh, what happened that night? Or they regret something that happened. And so in essence, we're supporting just because alcohol is legal, or in some states now marijuana, like we're being supportive of saying, hey, come to this event where your mind will be altered with a particular substance, and then that's going to be a great way of Dutch courage and forming this connection. Whereas let's go back to what's an authentic connection. How do you really bring your team together? And people are going to connect in different ways. And I think it's extremely important, putting addiction to one side, like why do we need to put a substance in our body that's going to help that? There are many people, let's take the analogy again of these 15 people, there are going to be many people within that team that have different skills and different interests outside of work. perhaps some people are interested in spin classes, and that's a great way of physical exercise as well as some mental exercise as well. There could be people that are into meditation and want to lead a meditation class or an affirmation class. And really there are 4 different elements of health, which is physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual. And so that's another great opportunity at a team meeting. Ask your team, what are some of the things that you do outside of work to support your health in these different areas? And what are some of these things that we could do together as a team?
That's a really good point. I think there's, and it's not just that, alcohol is an option. I think we've all been on sales teams where if you want to be one of the cool kids, you're going to try to figure out how you can go drink for drink with, the boss or the one who's killing it on their quota every quarter. And usually those people are out drinking the rest of them, right? And so there's also this weird competitive element to drinking and partying, and that it definitely limits your ability, I think, to create a really deep and meaningful connection with your peers and with your colleagues. But it's also not furthering your health or your sort of performance in other ways. There's all kinds of things that feed us in much more long-lasting and much deeper and more positive ways. And I love that you brought up meditation. When you were telling your story, it made me think of Dan Harris. And I'm not sure if you've read his book, 10% Happier, but he's a news anchor who, after being a war reporter and having totally undiagnosed PTSD from covering these really horrifying war zones for years, he was partying, he was, drinking and doing drugs, and he had a panic attack on camera and had a meltdown where you couldn't understand what he was saying. And his story is really incredible, where he talks about his sort of journey into meditation and about what that's done for him. And he has a very sort of funny and very honest take that I highly recommend to people. But I think, to your point, digging into all of these other ways that we can bond as a team, but also feed ourselves and feed the good parts that are going on within us, through meditation, through exercise. There's a lot going on that can make us better in our jobs while also connecting us more deeply to the people around us at work and outside of work as well. And it's something that I think we're starting to talk about a lot more, but it hasn't gotten a lot of attention, particularly in the workplace and particularly on sales teams, I think. And so it's impressive, and it's very needed, the conversation that you're really driving forward. So I very much appreciate what you're doing.
But I love that book, and it was a game changer for me. And he's also got a great podcast where he interviews many people. And the thing I really love about that as well is he looks at some of these traditional ideas of what meditation is, or some of these motivational, inspirational meditation teachers, and he kind of calls them out on their crap. Because a lot of it is a front and it's not realistic. And so I had this idea that meditation was, I have to sit, have to clear my mind, let's say for 30 minutes, an hour. But in reality, I've forgotten the exact amount he does every day, but he breaks it up, and he does some when he's in a cab in Manhattan. He does some when he's in the office, some before he's about to go live. And the best analogy that I've really heard for meditation is kind of like when you're watching the news and you've got the ticker at the bottom, and so the ticker being all these different stories, and these are all the thoughts that are going on in my mind. And then every so often, one of them is going to become the main news story, and that's really where my mind is focused. And then it's just watching that, and it's acknowledging it, and then letting it go. So it's not about clearing your mind and having an empty mind. And I think one of the other challenges is, just being honest, like if I had listened to this podcast, let's say 10 years ago, I would not have been able to relate whatsoever. And because I was this person that if I didn't respond to an email within 5 minutes, someone would think something was wrong. And when I joined Salesforce and Mark Benioff, the CEO and co-CEO and founder, has a great journey around mindfulness and meditation as well. But I wasn't able to relate to it. And only when I went through my life events was I able to start to realize the value of self-care. And so one of the questions I think about a lot is for the people that are either at the start of their career or who perhaps haven't had a life event, how do we help them to see actually you don't need to wait until it's too late. You could be proactive, and there's many benefits in doing this, even if you haven't got this big traumatic event or story in your life. There's really value to you and to your friends and your family, all those around you at any point in your life.
I think that's it's interesting. I think there's also a bit of a generational shift happening where the kind of older, and it's kind of interesting. A few minutes ago, I was wondering to myself how much customers drive these attention-seeking party-based behaviors, because the days of taking people out and whining and dining them, I don't think people expect that from sales anymore either, but there's still this kind of assumption that, oh, we're going to do something for our customers, it's going to be a happy hour, versus we're going to do something for our customers, let's give them all massages. I don't know. But it's interesting now more and more. I have not really had a meditation journey yet. I'm writing this stuff down. I'm going to go take a look at it. I've tried it a few times. Hasn't really done a lot for me. But what I find really interesting is how often when I'm interviewing people, I always ask about coping mechanisms indirectly, but I always ask about it. How often people are bringing this stuff up, and people who are very early in their careers. So when I'm interviewing entry-level salespeople, I'd say at least 30, if not 50% of people bring up some form of meditation or mindfulness as something they do as a part of their self-care routine. The only thing that comes up more often is exercise.
That's amazing.
Out of the gym. It's really surprised me. And that's something that's changed even in the past 2 years.
Yeah.
So I think that society as a whole is starting to understand it. I hope at least, that people who are coming into this industry are coming into it now understanding a little bit more, having been raised in a culture that is talking about these things more than we did, even I think when we were kids. I vividly remember Columbine and the events, and that was really the first thing I think about where mental health was something that people talked about. And that was 98, 99.
Yeah.
So we've got a generation of kids now. People are coming into this, just so we're clear, the kids who are graduating high school now in 2019 were born 2 years after Columbine. Yeah, I know, it makes me feel terribly old as well.
Wow, that's wild.
I tell people all the time, I made a Bill Clinton joke about a year ago. I just did a really bad Bill Clinton impression, said, I feel your pain, did my thumbs up and bit my lip. It was horrible. And it was dead silence in the room. And I had to explain. I was like, it was Bill Clinton in the 96 campaign. And this delightful girl who I just hired from Princeton actually looked at me completely with this big smirk on her face and said, I wasn't born yet. I was just, oh no.
Yeah. And we are in this society now where, I remember doing my homework using encyclopedias that was on a CD-ROM, or even books. And it's interesting you mentioned Columbine. There was a TED Talk I watched the other day by Austin Eubanks, who was one of the kids at the time, who was there, and he saw his best friend shot and killed. And his TED Talk really opened up about how that he had no experience around alcohol or narcotics, and then in order to deal with some of the physical pain, emotional pain, that's when he was prescribed opiates for the first time, and then that's when he developed a very severe opiate addiction. And as we know, it's a pandemic right here in the U.S. right now. And his TED Talk, which was in the middle of 2017, I was inspired by it. It was a true example of someone who's been through this, extremely traumatic incident, who has come through on the other side, and been in recovery. And then I read an article that on Saturday, he relapsed and overdosed and passed away. And it's so sad that he ultimately survived that shooting. And then 20 years later, because of, some of the big challenges and ethical issues we have around hospitals and doctors prescribing these things, unfortunately, it got him. And I think the other aspect I really like talking about when you mentioned cultural shift and changes, I really see this fitting under the umbrella of equality. And if we look at some of the other, great movements that are going on right now, for example, looking at equal pay between men and women, which I still think is crazy that we're even having this conversation. And, the fact that we still have a long way to go, but there are so many different movements and initiatives focused on bringing in equality, both in terms of gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation. And I really see mental health as an invisible disability. And how do we bring equality in then? How do we ensure that me putting my story out there, that I'm not seen any differently, that I'm still seen as an equal? And I actually believe, as I said earlier, that it makes me stronger. And so I think it's really important, again, that we talk about equality and diversity, because people, a lot of time, me included, that go through these experiences and challenges, I started to feel like an outsider and just started to isolate even more. Whereas in reality, again, go back to that 1 in 5, there are so many people around us going through the same things. And so this is where the cultural shift is really important, that we do come forward, that we do talk about this. And when I went in my first rehab and I found out that there was someone else that used the same drug that I used in the same way that I used, and it blew my mind that I was not alone, and that there were other people who had the same story as me. And, this is really where, I forgot the saying, like, when you share your pain, you're able to half it by sharing it with someone else. And this is why I really see this just as important a movement as some of the other movements we have going on. And we're right at the start, when we talk about how far we have to go here. I really see the mission, like with UNCrushed, as a 30-year project. It's something I'm going to do for my entire lifetime. And there are many people in recovery. And again, when I use recovery, I don't just mean drugs or alcohol, that are coming forward. They're speaking about whatever traumas they've been through. Perhaps it's physical abuse, sexual abuse, and people are finding the courage to come forward at the right time and share their experiences. And that's going to make it much easier for this generation, the next generation, to understand that it is okay to come forward and ask for help.
I think you bring up such an important point, and one that is really universal to all of us. There is something about each and every one of us that makes us different, that makes us feel like an outsider at some moments, and makes us feel like we're alone when we really aren't. And the more we can tell these stories of the fact that, yeah, we're all different, which makes us all not different. It makes us all kind of the same. It helps us have more empathy for one another. It helps us recognize the fact that we really are all in this together, and that by sharing these stories, by supporting one another as we kind of go through this, we have this opportunity to grow and improve and support one another, but together. And that we don't all have to feel so alone when we're going through the hard stuff. And I really, as we kind of wrap this up, I just want to emphasize, like, Ashley and I appreciate so much, one, that you're willing to talk to us about this, but that you're talking about your experience and really kind of leading the charge in this way, because it's very needed. And I feel very confident that your willingness to be bold, your willingness to be that man in the arena and really share that story with others is going to make it easier for others to follow suit and make it easier for others to feel a little less alone and a little more likely to go and get help. So thank you for doing that.
And as we try to wrap this up as well, we're going to actually do something we're calling the lightning round. To end on a slightly happier note, we've developed a series of questions. We'd love to just run through really quick, short answers, just the first thing that comes to your mind, get to know you a little bit, as well as hopefully end on a slightly lighter note. Just kind of to mention this as well, we will put some links in the show notes to not only the suicide prevention hotline. If you are in a place where you're feeling like everything is lost, you are not alone. There are groups like UNCrushed. There are a million resources out there. All you have to do is raise your hand. Reach out to any of us, take a look at the show notes. There is hope out there, even if you're just feeling a little bit frustrated. It's a lot easier to deal with things when you ask for help earlier rather than later. The most old school sales manager I ever worked for always said, never lose alone. And while he was talking about never losing a deal because you didn't ask for help, I think the same thing applies to yourself. The worst thing you could lose is yourself. And the worst thing for your business is for you to lose yourself. Yep. So kind of diving into this, Casey, I'm thinking, as a side, we'll cut this out. I'll just do first. Do you have the doc pulled up?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm thinking I'll do the first and you do the second when we just go back and forth.
Perfect.
Cool. All right, so Tim, what's your morning routine?
The first thing I do when I get up is not look at my phone, and this is something I'm still working on. And then I'd write a gratitude list. So I'm on a text thread with 10 other people, and I list out 10 things that I'm grateful for. I then do a 5-minute meditation. And then I start to look at what I get to do for the rest of the day.
That's awesome. So what's your guilty or not so guilty pleasure at the end of a long day?
I have a mini golden doodle called Teddy, and he is my obsession. So just spoiling him, spending time with him, it just brings me so much happiness getting to come home to him and see him being really happy.
That means you owe us a pic for the show notes. Pics or it didn't happen.
Or video.
Or video.
Yeah.
So who is an amazing sales leader that no one is talking about that we should pay attention to?
I always look at people that I've directly worked for. They're some of the most inspirational people for me. And so I won't put any names out in particular, but I'm very grateful for every sales leader or marketing leader that I've worked for. And in general, they are people that have always gone above and beyond just work. They've supported me through my hard times. They've also helped me to really understand that what's the purpose of life, and a career plan is so much more than just work. What do I really want to achieve in my life?
What is the weirdest thing that a prospect has ever said to you?
That's a hard one.
If nothing comes to mind, we can skip it.
Yeah, I'm probably skip that one.
Okay. So then what's your pump up song?
I think it's Genuine. Pony.
Yes.
God, I don't think that was going to happen. Yeah.
All right.
Yes, that's guilty pleasure.
Well, there we go. Now we got both. You only get to use one tool for the next week. Do you pick phone or email?
Phone, because I can do my email from my phone.
Cheater.
Do you have a favorite sales book?
I've got to work with some really good, influential thought leaders in the sales space. I'm a big fan of The Challenger Customer by CB, now Gartner.
Yeah.
And then we talked earlier on as well about Dan Harris's book. And even though it doesn't fit under the sales category, 10% Happier, I think it's just as applicable for sales, because it's a massive skill that will enable salespeople to be better.
Where was your last vacation?
In the Maldives.
Ooh. I'm very envious. And can you pick one person? I know you've already said that you've had a bunch of amazing people that you've worked for, but is there one person that you think has had the biggest impact on your career?
Yeah, in my first role out of university, there was a sales leader called Rogerio Almeida, and he always met up with me monthly, mentoring me. And he has helped me out so much. And yeah, I don't talk to him anymore. Like, this is back in England, and I think we connected on LinkedIn. But just seeing the time that he gave in order to help me has really helped me create the mentality of giving back and wanting to help others and pay it forward.
That's wonderful.
All right. And last question is, what's one thing you wish you'd learned earlier in your career?
I think self-care. You know, if I could have perhaps made this journey a lot easier. And just knowing that actually this isn't a weakness, it's strength in telling my truth.
I love that.
All right. Thank you so much, Tim.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you so much.